Today, I am joined by Leigha May, a leadership and career coach with over 12 years of corporate recruiting and HR executive experience. Her North Star is helping individuals create the lives they love while simultaneously making our workplaces more human centric. While leading and building teams at companies like Nike, SpaceX, and The Honest Company, her corporate work has centered on teaching companies how to identify and hire the right talent and retain them by creating intentional, inclusive, and growth minded cultures. Over the past 7 years as a certified leadership and career coach, she has supported thousands of busy professionals in overcoming burnout, imposter syndrome, and perfectionism while simultaneously curating the intentional, value led work life of their dreams. You can check her out on Instagram at L May Coaching. I love how Leigha May shares how we can use our unique values to keep ourselves filled up and able to give out in every area of our life. She, like me, believes work life balance is a myth. Listen to our conversation to find an easier way to create that harmony you're looking for. So excited to welcome you here, Leigha May. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Dawn. Thanks so much for the invite.
So tell us a little bit more about what it is that you focus on. What is it that you love to bring to help others?
Yeah. So for me, it's really about the integration of work and life. Kind of growing up in the corporate field, it was always separate. And how do I do great at my day job? And then how do I be all the things at home? And I always really struggled with trying to fill two separate buckets. And so through my own journey and then the work with my clients, I found really integrating the two, not compartmentalizing ourselves, but being one whole human wherever we go. And working with that is kind of the crux of my work and what I have found really resonates with so many people.
I love this because we often talk about being authentic and feeling aligned. And I think when you do have that separation, it's really hard to feel like you're being authentic because you're like this one person here and you this other person here, and they're like never ever the whole of what you are. So I like that you really focus on bringing these together.
Exactly. And not even to mention the mental load of switching hats all of the time. I got to reply to this email in this way. Now I've got to go mom this way over here. And just that mental exercise of always having to switch roles. It's so challenging. Why do we do that to ourselves?
Yeah, I agree. It can be really frustrating too when you feel like if people don't understand that you're more than just the role you're playing in the moment. And so it's really nice when you feel like, okay, I can be myself and people just have to understand that. And this is who I am.
100%. I couldn't agree more.
So tell us a little bit about this whole work life balance idea, because one thing I will say is we've talked about balance in different ways on the podcast over the months. And some people are, some guests say there's no such thing as balance. Other guests say, well, there is, but it's not like a teeter totter. It's more like this is and that is. What is your perspective on balance?
Yeah. I think work life balance is a myth. I do. And I think when you think about balance, I don't know about you, but I always imagine like me standing on like a unicycle, like doing the teeter totter trying, like if everything's not perfectly balanced, then something falls, something goes wrong. And that is so much pressure to walk around with in the world. So I like to kind of distill that myth altogether, although it's a common term that society uses, and really think about like what is the integration of my full self wherever I go, whether that's at work, in my business, in my social life, in my personal endeavors, my hobbies. How can I just focus on me as one and get off of that unicycle, get off of that like, constant stress cycle of having to keep everything 50-50.
Yeah. So when you say that, some things that come up for me and things I've heard too is okay, but if I'm like not feeling balanced, then something is going to slide, something is going to fall. I don't know if I can juggle all the plates. So what do we do? What are we talking about here then?
Yeah. Well, when I think about balance, I'm always thinking of like a scale, right? It's like two things you have to juggle. And I tend to believe that we are far more complex than two different roles that we fulfill work and life. And so I really use the system, the framework of values when I think about how do I want to show up for my life. So it's not these two things, but what are my personal unique values and how do I make sure those buckets are full? Some of that might be at work, some of that might be in my personal life. But how do I make sure my needs are resourced versus how do I balance these two checklists all of the time?
I really like this because when we talk about, keeping our buckets full, this is a phrase I say to my kids often when, they do something or they mention something or they say something, I just say back to them, "You know what? That just filled my bucket." And when we say that, we just mean that it's taking care of an inner need, right? Something that we appreciate and feel fulfilled by. And so when we talk about balance and we say that it's about filling our buckets, making sure that it's feeling really good on whatever area of our lives, that really changes then how we're approaching the day, does it not?
Oh, 100%. Because if I'm focused on filling my buckets, if I'm focused on leading with my values, then that gives me a filter to put all of my to-do lists through. Is everything on that list important? Does everything match my values? And that gives me a framework to be able to say, no, I'm going to say no to these things, or I'm going to delegate those things, or I want to do this, but it's not the most important thing. It can wait. If I'm focused on values, if I'm focused on balance and getting it all done, well, then I'm just constantly chasing that because the minute you check something on your to-do list, three more things falls, to the bottom of it. So I like the idea of values. And if I'm filling my bucket, my values buckets, then I can really pull back on the constant to-dos and tasks. I don't want my life to be task focused. I'm more than productivity. And so that's why I love using values as a lens for work life balance, as we call it.
Okay, my perfectionists that are listening right now, that doesn't mean that you have to panic that your lists have to go out the window and you can't check off things because I get you. I love lists. I love checking off things. But there's a difference, right, in the way that you are producing, in the way that you are accomplishing through the day.
100%. And I love my list. I've got my list right here for the day. But when there's too much, when I can tell like this isn't possible for me today, I can say, okay, with my values, what matters most? I can star those things. And on a less busy day, I love my list. So don't take me wrong here. We're not throwing away the to-do list. We're just being realistic about what we can manage. And there will always be more things, especially if you're running your own business like you and I are. There is no end to this to-do list. There's always more. And so using the lens of values can really just help. How do I prioritize on the most important things first? That's what balance is, right? How do we make sure that those most important buckets are full? And then the other things can come along if it feels good. And if not, we can have a conversation.
Okay, so I'm just going to lay out a for example and get you to respond back because I'm thinking, if somebody's saying, yeah, but what do you mean by filtering this through my values? So, for example, if my day is that I need to get up, I need to maybe send some emails to my podcast guests that are coming up, I need to edit a couple of podcasts, I need to make sure my daughter gets to gymnastics and get some lunch for the kids. And maybe I also would like to be able to check off a few things that I'm trying to finish up in my business, whether it's, putting some newsletters together, whatever it is. What am I doing when I'm, first sitting down, or at least for me, I first sit down in the morning and just take a look at my list so that I can kind of plan out the day. How am I running that through the values?
Yeah, 100%. So I don't know your personal values. I can tell you mine, which are freedom, creativity, and connection. And that's what I want to focus on: freedom, creativity, and connection. So I would look at that list and things need done, right? Like your daughter still needs to make it to her appointment. You still need to get the email out. And so I would really feel into the energy of those things. What helps me, for me, my best energy is in the morning. So that's where I'm going to put my creative endeavors, like creating the email, getting that out. And then, when I think about connection, maybe that ride in the car is really important with my daughter, right? So I would slot that in next. By the end of the day, like I'm ready for freedom. My energy is a little bit lower. So I'm going to say, okay, let's do those like quick tasks. Let's get them out of the way. Time block it maybe for an hour or two so I can still have the freedom after. So I'm feeling into my energy. I'm also letting my values lead the way. And if there was something on there like, you know, I don't know, do this update to my website, and I'm not a tech person and I hate that kind of thing. I'm like, okay, this doesn't feel my freedom. This doesn't feel my creativity. It doesn't feel my connection. That would be a task for me to look at and say, okay, is this something I can outsource? Is this something it just has to get got done? And so I'm going to plan it when it's a good energy time. Like that item doesn't necessarily fit my values. So like, let's at least have a conversation before just assuming that I'm the one that has to do it. Same thing with gymnastics, right? Like with your dropping your daughter off. If connection wasn't that car ride wasn't connection for you, and it was just this just kind of slices my day in too many areas. She's always on her phone anyway. Car time's not a connection. That might be something that I delegate. Still needs done, but can I bring in help? Can I have other support so I can do my best work on my values? And then maybe our connection times at dinner tonight.
For the months of July, August, and September, we are focusing on being a woman entrepreneur. I know personally that along my journey, there have been some amazing coaches who have helped me figure out exactly what I wanted to do and how I wanted it to look and feel. Sometimes the overwhelm was crazy, and I needed that outside view to help simplify what I needed to focus on and to keep me accountable. My favorite thing about working with a coach is that I get more done in less time. Whether it is learning to manage my time, having step-by-step actions to complete a goal, or having someone to help me overcome limiting beliefs and mindset blocks, the coaches I have worked with have been a huge part of my success. Maybe you're looking for a coach or are curious if it's something you need. Because I believe so highly in helping women on their journey, I want to offer you something special. Each month, from July through September, I'm offering 30-minute strategy calls for free to the first 6 women who book a call with me. Each month, 6 new spots will open, and I hope you will take advantage of this time to get clear on where you are and where you want to go. I love learning about the women in my community, and I'm looking forward to hearing about what you want to create. Book your call by clicking on the link in the show notes, or go to my podcast page on my website, pursueprogress.com/podcast. These 6 spots are first come, first serve, so don't wait. Now, back to the podcast. This makes it so much simpler to decide what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, if you need to outsource. Like really, really easy way to look through things.
100%. And it's going to be different for every person, which is why I really recommend getting clear on your personal values. Because it's so easy to look at a to do list and say, yeah, it all needs done, and I'm the only person. But if you want to live a value led life, if you truly want to achieve, like get rid of that balance where you're chasing, then you have to start making really intentional choices with how you prioritize what you allow on your calendar and into your day. I know that can sound like a luxury. So hear me when I say, like, I know that it takes work to get there, but it is possible. And if you start even just with your to do list today, you'll find with a little bit of practice, this is a really freeing exercise.
When I think of like the beginning of this, if this is not something I've ever considered before, suddenly I'm like, oh, this looks like it could simplify my life. I should try it out.
Yeah.
How do I start looking at my personal values? Maybe I've never really thought specifically, what are my values? So what do I do there?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of values exercises online you can find. I'll also provide a link to my values workbook that I created. It's an 18-page worksheet to really take you through. One thing I want to say about values, this is not a list of words that we sit and circle all of our aspirational ideals. This is something that's inherent. It's something that's been fueling you from the day you were born, whether you have the language for it or not. So all of us are driven by these values, and it's really just a matter of sitting down, kind of combing through those past experiences, the highs, the lows, to see what was in the background when I was my most connected, when I was my most engaged. What was I tapping into? For me, creativity, freedom, connection. When I was in my lowest moments, what was missing for me? 99% of the time, it's going to be those values as well. So I thought an exercise in my workbook you can go through. There's also plenty of things online, but it is unique to each person.
So that workbook you can find in the show notes. I just want to let everybody know that the link is there. So get it and actually work your way through it. Because again, it's one thing to say, I want balance. It's another thing to actually take some time to make that happen. And nothing that we want is going to automatically happen. It's all about us taking a moment, taking a break out of the treadmill kind of life and deciding that we're going to intentionally set aside time in order to make the life that we want.
Well, and that's the thing. Most of us, I would say, much of the time, are running on autopilot. Life happens to us. The to do list just keeps stacking. So it's by no fault of our own. But if you don't like your results, if you don't like how you feel, if you're always kind of pushing and pulling for that balance, there is choice in that. But it does take intentionality. It does take saying, I'm going to stop this madness. I'm going to sit down and figure this out for me. And you won't get it right the first time. It is trial and error, it is practice, but it is so worth it to be able to say no to things on your list, to be able to delegate confidently without the guilt, knowing that you're doing your best work in alignment with who you truly are.
What are some of the things that we will see if our life is in balance?
Oh my gosh, so much. I think for me, when we talk about those high moments, those moments that you're really engaged and connected, when you're saying no to everything else, or even 75% of no to the things that don't serve you, there's so much more freedom to, when is the last time you actually engaged in a hobby that lit you up, that wasn't for productivity, that wasn't for your business, that wasn't for your kid, that wasn't for a friend, like something just for you, right? So I think time freedom is definitely a side effect of living, in this way. And I think more connection too, when you start to live through your values and you name them, you can tell really quickly, ooh, this friendship doesn't quite serve me the way it used to. I'm noticing there's a values conflict, or this thing that I normally would have said yes to, like, oh, I'm noticing it doesn't really sit well with me. Is it not meeting one of my values? Like you're able to be much more honest with yourself, and I think have a filter for everything, friendships, activities. And with that, there's so much more confidence that I think comes navigating your life with intention, with purpose.
Okay, so if you're listening to this, I want you to really understand the value of doing this. But I also want to, I guess acknowledge that, especially for my people pleasers, guilt can come alongside this. So, can we talk a little bit about how we navigate that?
Oh, 100%. And I don't even joke and say I'm a recovering people pleaser. I was born and raised in the Midwest, so people pleasing is like deep in our soul. So I definitely can relate to all of the people pleasers out there. And I think it's really about acknowledging like this is uncomfortable, right? Anytime you decide to change how you're showing up in the world, even if it's for the better, if it is counter to maybe how you've been raised, your cultural programming, it is going to feel uncomfortable. And so I recommend a lot of journaling, or, having support, coach therapy, whatever it may be, to really understand, when I say no to this, ooh, that felt uncomfortable. What is that? Let me sit and ask myself. And sometimes I'll just say, what is the discomfort? Write that down. Why is that uncomfortable? Why is that uncomfortable? Why is that uncomfortable? So I ask why at least 3 times and journal it out. And almost always for me, it's because of people pleasing, because I don't want to hurt that person's feelings, because I want them to think that I'm the all-star employee who can just say yes to everything. And so then it's sitting with that uncomfortable truth, like, okay, this feels uncomfortable, but I can see I would make this choice from people pleasing. Is that something I want to move forward with? And to be honest, sometimes it's yes. Sometimes it's, I don't want to cause that friction. I see I'm people pleasing and I'm going to do it this time, but at least it's an honest conversation. And in doing that over and over, there's going to be a lot of times that you start saying, oh no, I don't want to people please. This is uncomfortable, but let me just try it on what it would feel like to say no or not this time. So it is a lot of self coaching and self work to overcome. And that is part of the process. If this was as easy as filling out a workbook, everyone would have done it by now, right? So it does take personal mentorship, I think, to really, get to this area.
So, you might be getting the feeling that, again, if you're listening, that you need to take time to do things. Like, I can't say that enough. And I think maybe I don't say it enough. But really, if there's an area of your life where you're feeling like it's just not what you want, whether it's like it really isn't what you want or just kind of isn't feeling good, stop. Like, stop. Don't just keep going because it's not going to change. And like we were mentioning, you can do the workbook. You can sit down and just start asking yourself questions around the uncomfortable feelings. But I love that you bring this up again because I think it's important that we take the time out. We don't just keep going forward if we're not feeling balanced.
Absolutely. And I want to say, like, this work is deep work. This isn't about, I mean, we're talking about to-do lists, that's just the manifestation, but this work, especially with the people pleasing, the, perfectionism, that runs really deep. So I would just say also be so gentle with yourself and start in one area of your life. This does not need to be a revamp on your entire calendar, how you show up in every relationship right out the gate. Like, start in one area. If you know that you're most unhappy when you're, juggling your kids from appointment to appointment, that might be something to look. Or if you're most unhappy thinking about going to your laptop and looking at your to-do list every day, maybe you start tackling it there. So just choose one area and be so gentle with yourself because this is really shifting an identity and how you show up.
That's right. And I mean, it can bring up some anxiety. It can bring up some, worry about who am I on the other side of this? Will I like that person on the other side of this? Or is this person that's coming out actually me? Or is the person I am now actually me? Right? Like we get a lot of those questions.
Oh, 100%. And it's so interesting because, I would ask like who you are now, is that actually you? Like, yes, a lot of parts of it and familial programming, cultural programming, gender roles. I mean, layer in all of the things. And so that's why I love to point people back to values. It's so personal, it's so unique, and they've been in you all along. So we're not saying become someone different. We're saying let's just turn down the noise of who you think you're supposed to be. And like, let's just see what's really under the surface. Let's just really get back to the core. And your values will never lead you wrong. They will never turn you into a person that you don't want to be.
So I ask this of every single guest that comes on, and I don't want to assume, even though we've talked about some different things, but which of the three P's do you relate to the most? Would it be the people pleaser, the perfectionist, or the procrastinator?
For sure, it's the people pleaser. I have been doing a lot of work on this over the years. So I would say I've excelled leaps and bounds. And I still every week uncover like, ooh, that was me wanting to people please. I think for me, it's really around wanting to make sure people are happy or comfortable or not uneasy. Even a silly example, I've had some health issues and someone asked me how my health was. I'm like, oh, I don't want to make them uncomfortable. If I'm like, oh, yeah, it's pretty tough right now. Like, but it was the truth. But I didn't want to make them uncomfortable. So, like, even that tiny thing of like, how much do I tell them about what's going on? Right? Was me trying to guard their experience. That's still people pleasing. So if it runs deep, but I think the more awareness you have, the easier it gets to spot it and work with it. I don't get mad at myself for people pleasing. Like, oh yeah, that runs really deep. My Midwest nice runs really deep. Isn't that interesting? Versus, beating myself up for it or why am I still here? Like it's just part of my makeup. And now I've learned how to work with it.
That's right. And for all the people pleasers, I mean, you're generally nice and caring and loving people. And that is actually a really good part of people pleasing.
It's wonderful. Yeah. Everything has light and shadow. People pleasing can be beautiful in its light, like caretaking and empathy and thoughtfulness. And when it extends into shadow, then it's not as helpful. And so it's not a trait that we don't want. It's just how do we keep it in checked in a way that really serves us.
Leah May, where is the best place if somebody wants to find you to connect?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me over on Instagram. It's L May, so LMAY coaching. And then I also have a podcast called The Work Life Coach, where we dive into all of these things about work life balance, work topics in general. How do we bring our authenticity to the workplace, whether that's your own business or something more traditional?
That's fantastic. Is there anything else you would like to say before we go today?
Oh, I'm so grateful for the opportunity. I love the work that you're doing here. And I just want to encourage everyone, you get to create the life that you want. It's not easy, it's not overnight, but really it just takes a little bit of intentionality. So if you don't love something the way it is right now, I would just encourage you apply a little intentionality and see what you can do the next 30 days.
So make sure that you connect in with Leah May. This is the point of being able to listen to podcasts, not just for the episode, but for actually finding community and support and that village to help you live your best life. And I encourage you to find her in all the places. Thank you again for being here on the podcast, Leah May. It was fantastic to have you.
Oh, it was such a delight. Thank you so much, Don.